So just by way of disclosures, almost all of our funding, as I will describe a little bit further, comes from the National Institute on Aging. And we have 4 large or multi-component grants, but we're also very grateful and honored to have funding from the Alzheimer's Association as well as an anonymous foundation. And recently we've been exploring ways to partner with industry, particularly Avid Radiopharmaceuticals, now a wholly owned subsidiary of Eli Lilly. So I'd like to begin this 2013 State of the ADRC by plagiarizing Charles Dickens' novel, The Tale of Two Cities, and plagiarize his opening lines. It is the best of times, and that's true. I think 2013 does represent the best of times for our Knight Alzheimer's Center because it is the most exciting time ever for our research, translational research in Alzheimer's disease. Part of that is because we are, along with other programs, at the forefront of developing biological markers that allow us to identify the pathology, the brain changes of the disease in living people, and hence that opens up the opportunity to study and potentially treat the disease before any dementia symptoms develop. Clinical research, and that is now coming to a culmination here in 2013. And also because we now can identify pre-clinical, pre-symptomatic Alzheimer's disease, it does allow the opportunity to introduce drugs with the goal of delaying or even preventing the onset of symptoms, of prevention of Alzheimer's disease, and that is also underway as well. So this is the best of times in terms of research. But it's also the worst of times, because one reason, or a major reason, we're looking to begin prevention trials in people without symptoms is all of the trials of agents in the past 15 years in symptomatic people with drugs that we thought have a real chance to alter the disease course have shown no benefit or have been stopped because of side effects. So it's a really very discouraging time, at least in therapeutic trials of Alzheimer's disease. And the other reason that it is the worst of times is because of our funding crisis. I mentioned that we're primarily funded, or the vast majority of our funding comes from the National Institute on Aging, part of the National Institutes of Health, federally funded, congressionally appropriated funding, and that has become a dire situation, a dire funding climate throughout the NIH, and unfortunately, particularly within the National Institute of Aging. So funding, just at the time when we are poised to make the greatest advances, is being sharply curtailed. So the best of times, let's emphasize the positive. Our research has never been stronger. We have these 4 grants from the NIA that now cover the lifespan. By that I mean we are at Washington University evaluating Alzheimer's disease or preclinical Alzheimer's disease in people beginning as young as age 18 and as old as they're willing to come. And we have some people past 100. So we're really looking at the illness over an 80-plus year span. We have been focusing, as I indicated, on biomarkers, and we continue to utilize biomarkers that have been developed in previous years, but we're also here at Washington University developing new biomarkers, including a cognitive biomarker called practice effects. There's a tendency when you first are exposed to a battery of cognitive tests, you take those tests and you perform however well you perform. You come back in a year, you don't remember those tests, but you do slightly better because the setting is a little more familiar, you've been exposed to the situation, even if you don't remember the specific test. So practice effects, and whether practice effects can be used, or the absence of practice effects can be used as an indicator of preclinical Alzheimer's disease. A number of imaging modalities we've been exploring for years, but new imaging modalities are resting state, or RS, functional connectivity, how the brain networks are connected and whether they're disrupted in preclinical Alzheimer's disease, and the energy utilization of the brain, glycolysis, or new imaging markers. In the spinal fluid, CSF, we've developed two new biomarkers that have the name of BILIP1 and YKL40, but also potentially a biomarker that addresses a critical protein in Alzheimer's disease, tau, and even some suggestion that a tau marker might be detectable in the blood. This, in many ways, has been described as the holy grail of biomarker testing. Well, we all realize that the cerebrospinal fluid is bathing the brain, close to the brain surface, and very helpful in biomarker research. Everyone appreciates that if we had a sensitive and reliable blood biomarker, that would be much more accessible to many more people. We're doing new initiatives in addition to our biomarker research and preclinical Alzheimer's research, looking at the interaction between sleep and Alzheimer's disease, both in animal models as well as in humans. The good news is the more you sleep, the less your risk of Alzheimer's disease. So not sleeping necessarily through the state of the ADRC lecture, but in general, more sleep, less risk. Mentioned tau, and in addition to using tau as biomarkers, it also is potentially a therapeutic target. So Dave Holtzman, Mark Diamond, and many others are exploring agents that may help us treat tau abnormalities. So many of you know that we've been focused for years on anti-amyloid therapies, and now there may be at least an antibody to try to treat tau. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antidepressant medications have also a new initiative headed by Yvette Chalene, and looking at their effect on possibly protecting the brain against deleterious effects of amyloid. And then new genetic factors have been reported in the past year that give new insights into how Alzheimer's disease and related disorders may develop. The landmark paper published last summer, August, in the New England Journal of Medicine, Randy Bateman, the first author, for the first data-driven paper about our dominantly inherited Alzheimer network. This is, as I say, really does represent a landmark study because it helps validate all of the biomarkers that we've been testing in older people. They are really performing in the way we anticipated in this special group of dominantly inherited individuals, and it gives a temporal ordering. We know when the biomarker abnormalities develop in relation to when we think the person will become demented. So we can see the window of opportunity of change before dementia symptoms occur. And the DIAN study, Dominantly Inherited Alzheimer Network, was first funded in 2008. The grant from the National Institute on Aging to allow us here at Washington University to lead and coordinate the DIAN study did not have sufficient funding to allow it to also support therapeutic trials in the DIAN sample, but clearly noted that the DIAN individuals would be an ideal group to test treatments that might prevent or delay the onset of symptoms in asymptomatic individuals. So to that end, under Randy's direction in 2009, a clinical trials committee was established, made up of DIAN investigators and other interested individuals, and then evolved or transitioned into a DIAN trials unit, also led by Randy, very closely aligned with the DIAN observational study, looking at these biomarker changes in the DIAN sample, but also now with its mission to look at therapeutic trials in the DIAN cohort. And a major innovation of that DIAN trials unit was to develop a pharma consortium made up now of 10 different pharmaceutical companies, all of whom have in development or even in experimental trials agents that may be efficacious in treating the Alzheimer's disease process. So to my knowledge, this is the first time this consortium has brought drug companies together in a pre-competitive environment to talk about their agents with other drug companies. That's unheard of, but they're all drawn to the power of the DIAN participants as a natural laboratory to test their drugs. So the Pharma Consortium not only brings drugs, and up to now 15 different drugs have been nominated, but also funding to allow the DIAN Trials Unit to get started. The DIAN Trials Unit has proposed testing 3 drugs simultaneously. 2 of them, solidazepam and gantenerumab, are antibodies against this amyloid beta protein. They target different forms of the anti-beta protein. And then a third drug was proposed that reduces the production of amyloid beta. Unfortunately, just in the past few days, the company, Eli Lilly, that is testing in a phase 2 study the beta secretase inhibitor, BACE inhibitor, found that there's an acceptable amount of hepatic toxicity in their participants, so they've withdrawn development. So we'll have to see if a third drug if another drug can substitute for the BACE inhibitor. But the DIAN trial is designed to enroll 240 DIAN participants, or people from DIAN eligible families. 160 of those individuals will be mutation carriers, largely asymptomatic. The 2 stages of the trial, the first roughly 2 years in duration, to see which of these drugs is best able to engage the target, and we will use biomarkers to determine that. And then the drug that seems to have the greatest benefit in engaging the target, and hopefully a safety profile, will be selected for a longer, maybe a 3-year or so cognitive outcome study to see if it really can stabilize cognitive performance and prevent cognitive decline. So this is very exciting. The trials unit group has been working very diligently, as has the DIAN observational study, to support these trials. As I mentioned, I think there are a number of milestones of the trials unit. First time ever, in my knowledge, to have pharmaceutical companies collaborating to produce a single trial, even though their compound, the ones they're nominating, may not be selected for the trial. They're all participating and providing information on their agents. Washington University and the 2 companies, Roche and Eli Lilly, that do have the antibodies, agreed on a single protocol, and all contracts between those companies and Washington University were signed in less than a year. It's an amazing feat. The Food and Drug Administration approved the proposed trial to prevent symptomatic Alzheimer's disease last fall and did not require any protocol changes, also really remarkable. And for any of you dealing with the Washington University Institutional Review Board, that was approved also, with no contingency. So that's quite remarkable. And then within 3 months of announcing the selection of the original 3 drugs, the initial participant, a Washington University DIAN site participant, consented to enroll in the trial on New Year's Eve 2012, and that person was randomized to a treatment arm in March of this year, and subsequently another 4 DIAN participants have been randomized. So this means the first ever trial of a potentially disease-modifying anti-amyloid agent has been launched here at Washington University in an effort to delay or prevent the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. That's really just a tremendous accomplishment. Let's all applaud DIAN. All right, so the worst of times. So let's talk about the failure of drugs. drugs to launch since 2001 in an effort to halt the course or alter the course substantially of people with symptomatic Alzheimer's disease. So now these trials have all been initiated in people who already have the symptoms of dementia. They have all failed. There have been 7 phase 3 anti-amyloid studies, 2 phase 2 anti-amyloid studies that have all failed. And as you can see, it's not limited to just amyloid. Some people think amyloid may be the wrong target, maybe it is, but drugs that have tried to alter cholesterol and inflammation and insulin resistance and bioenergetics all have failed as well. So it's very discouraging. Investors are increasingly reluctant to underwrite the high cost of these trials. It's a very dismal climate now, and it's very, very discouraging. So that's a problem. We would say the problem is a single drug administered to someone who already has the symptoms is not likely to succeed. By the time symptoms are present, many more things are going on in the brain than simply amyloid or inflammation. They need a combination therapy. If you're going to be successful, we propose that using a single drug against a single target have to begin before symptoms. So that's why the Diane is such a pioneer. Well, this is what it costs the United States every year to care for Alzheimer's patients, $200 billion. You would think with public health menace of this magnitude that the NIH, the government, would say we have to do something. It's only going to get worse as people continue to age. It's a terrible drain on our public health coffers, so we must invest mightily to defeat this disease, so at least we would invest this much equal to the amount it costs. In reality, the federal government invests that amount. A portion of research dollars available for Alzheimer's disease are a fraction of the cost of Alzheimer's disease to our country. So said another way, for every $400 spent caring for somebody with Alzheimer's disease, the government funds $1 of research. Now, there are many terrible diseases besides Alzheimer's, no question about it. But other terrible diseases have not great, but a slightly improved profile of the cost that they engender versus the research spent on them, heart disease and cancer in particular. And you can see the amount here of annual investment by the NIH in research for these various disorders, cancer, heart disease, HIV/AIDS, and in purple, the bottom, Alzheimer's disease. So disproportionate to other major killers, Alzheimer's disease receives remarkably low federal support for research. Not surprisingly, all of those other illnesses, cancer, heart disease, HIV/AIDS, the percentage of people with those disorders who die each year is decreasing. They're going down. The only major killer in the United States, and the frequency of death is increasing, is the purple one, Alzheimer's disease. You get what you pay for. And here's the NIA budget. If you look at the blue line, the upper line, the Congress does increase, or has, not in the past few years, there's a flat line here at the very end, but up until then, it would increase the amount of budget for the NIA. Not very much, 1 to 2%, but there was an increase. The past few years, it's been flat. But of course, that 1 to 2% increase doesn't match the rate of inflation. So in actual buying power, what we get is the red line. We've had a 20% decrease over the past decade in the amounts of funds available at the NIA. And it's, of course, all of us who deal with research dollars know the tremendous burden that brings when we apply for a grant and we say we're budgeting our sample of individuals that will be approved and the assessments that we'll do, and we have $100 that will cost us to do this. The government gives us $80 and says, you make up the difference. It's also a challenge because under these very constrained budgetary times. The net amount of new grants being funded is very poor. 2012 at the NIA it was 16%, but you see what they're proposing this year is a reduction. So for the primary research grant, the R01, they're suggesting if it's a smallish grant, they're asking for under $500,000 in a budget year, you have to make it at the 11th percentile or better. And if you ask for a large grant, over $500,000, the 8th percentile. So that suggests that 92% of all applications for these larger grants will not be funded, even if meritorious. And just in 2003, the percentage was 33%. So remarkable reduction in the number of new grants. Now for new investigators, it's slightly better. New investigators are people who have never been awarded an R01. Your chances are slightly higher. And if you're an early stage investigator, less than 10 years since your terminal degree, slightly higher yet. But overall, very discouraging, not only for fueling the research engine, but for the bright young individuals who want to pursue a research degree. Our grants are not of the R01 type, as I keep saying. They're large, multi-component grants, program projects and centers. And for us, we have to get a priority score of 13. The best score you can get is 10. And some of you may remember, a few years ago, our Adult Children's Study grant received a priority score of 13 and was not funded. We had to reapply, got a 10. But it's very, very difficult now to get grants renewed. Here are the grants. Healthy Aging and Senile Dementia was our first large grant, 1984. We've just put in a renewal application. Will be reviewed next week, June the 28th. And as I say, we have to get a score of 13 or better. The Alzheimer's Disease Research Center grant, the renewal, it's also in its 30th year. It started the year after the HASD, but the renewal application has to go in next May. I mentioned the Adult Children's Study. We're in the second year of its renewal, and the Diane study is in the 5th year of a 6-year cycle, an unusual 6-year cycle, but we had just last month put in a renewal application for that. So we have 2 of our big grants under review this year, HASD and Diane, and next year the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. So consequences of the budget cuts at NIA. We don't know if some of our grants are going to be awarded. Andre Vasenko and Mark Graypool put in a revision to the Adult Children's Study, got a great priority score, 13. We think it's going to be funded, maybe up until by July 1 we'll get the answer, but we don't know for certain. We're hoping though, but even with the score of 13, they cannot assure us. The Diane TU with Randy Bateman has R01s under review beginning in July. And Carlos Kuchaga from the genetics score has an R01, also very well reviewed, but no guarantee yet of funding. So all of this has an effect on our ability to pay for the research we do, which is not inexpensive, it's quite expensive. For our amyloid imaging with PID, while we were sorting out that period of time in the Adult Children's Study, getting our grant renewed, we had to give up spending for amyloid imaging. We have a gap. We have a reduced budget for MRI scans in our imaging core. And this has threatened our clinical capacity. We cannot see as many of our participants on an annual basis as we have said we would. We've had 2 nurses who have left, nurse clinicians who have left the Memory and Aging Project, our clinical research office, and we haven't replaced either as of yet because of inadequate funds. And so that also limits the capacity to see persons longitudinally. And we're increasingly moving away from the traditional Memory and Aging Project reliance upon physicians in neurology, psychiatry, and geriatrics to do our clinical assessments, and we're training our nurse clinicians, nurse practitioners, and some unlicensed physicians to do those assessments as well. All right, so that's the worst of times, the budgetary situation. With all that doom and gloom, I do have to say we're extraordinarily fortunate to have these things. We're just remarkable. So it's a real testament to all of you who are associated with the ADRC that it is so well reviewed, and we so far have been successful in keeping those grants going. But I did want to show you the clear challenges we have in this funding. So let's turn now to highlights of the night ADRC. Just earlier this month, we had our annual participants meeting. The Memory and Aging Project is the research office where all of our participants come for their clinical assessments, their cognitive testing, and so forth. So they see the ADRC as the Memory and Aging Project, so we call it the Memory and Aging Project Participants Meeting. Had over 400 attendees, 70 of whom were African American. And you see we presented about how older adults can retain their cognitive abilities and become supernormal. If you want to know, anyone here is over the age of 60, you want to know how you too can be supernormal, see Rachel Chansky. Rachel, where are you? She waving her hand?
They're all looking for you.
She's ducking. I mentioned earlier sleep and amyloid beta, and Lucy presented on that. We heard a little bit about new biomarkers from Mark Diamond, and we heard about why brain autopsy remains a tremendously important, tremendously valuable gift of our participants. Not surprisingly, given all of the talents that you all have, we've been very productive, no matter how you measure it, in the past 3 years from the ADRC support in one form or another, over 300 publications in peer-reviewed journals. We're very interdisciplinary in the ADRC, 14 departments represented by ADRC investigators here at the School of Medicine, but also on the Danforth campus. And delighted to see representatives of Christina Duchek, Dave Devoda, others from the Department of Psychology. We funded 10 pilot projects in this 3-year period, and they've been very successful in terms of publications and also using the pilot studies to go on and obtain R01s, a program center grant, and several K awards and other non-federal funding for research, so very successful. Other people see us as a very valuable resource. You know, the purpose of an Alzheimer's disease research center is to foster and facilitate Alzheimer's research at our institution, at Washington University, but also nationally and even internationally. That's our job. And people see the value of our cohorts and biomarkers and imaging data that we get in these individuals. So since 2010, we've had almost 120 requests for access to our, just from federal grantees to our resources, and another 160 so from other grantees. So we're constantly processing requests for access to our participants, or their data, or their tissue. The Neuropathology Corps alone has distributed brain tissue to 23 different investigators, the Biomarker Corps, 29 sets of CSF samples, cerebrospinal fluid samples, and the Genetics Corps of 58 investigators. So this is a remarkable tribute to how valuable what we do is recognized by other people, because they come to us for the opportunity to utilize our resources in their research. Our imaging data, anonymized, are also available for anyone through this open access series of imaging studies developed by Randy Buckman and Dan Marcus. And it is available, it has been accessed by almost 300 investigators in the past 3 years. So this is quite noteworthy. It's also quite important to our success in getting our ADRC grant reviewed. The review panel looks to see, when we put in our renewal application next year, are we being utilized as a tissue and data resource? Do people find our data worthwhile? So it's very important that we accurately track this utilization of our resources as a criterion for how well we function as an ADRC. You may hear periodically from members of our administration corps to be certain that we know who is requesting what and to track that. It's very important for us as a metric to demonstrate why we should be renewed for another 5 years. Just one example of the utilization of some of our resources comes from a newly published study about the genetic risk for Alzheimer's disease in African Americans. Developing the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease is much more frequent in African Americans than it is in whites for reasons unknown. And one would ask, are the risk factors for developing Alzheimer's disease the same across races? Certainly age, I think, would be the same, but are there other factors that are the same or different? So just this spring, in a major publication in the Journal of American Medical Association, the largest ever study of the genetic risk factors for Alzheimer's disease was performed in African Americans. About 6,000 African Americans altogether, 2,000 of whom had symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, 4,000 who were cognitively normal. I'd like to note that our participants who are African American contributed their data to this study, over 100 from the Knight ADRC. The result was that African Americans have a particular form of the gene, goes by a funny name, ABCA7, that's the gene form. If they have that gene form, they're twice as likely to develop Alzheimer's disease as people who don't have that gene form. The reason this is important is that increased risk is much stronger for African Americans than it is for whites. So now this is the first identification of a genetic risk factor that is predominantly for African Americans, perhaps explaining why they may be at increased risk for developing Alzheimer's disease dementia. And this particular gene is involved in lipid metabolism, so that gives us a possible clue as to the mechanism. Our Alzheimer's disease research partners, our center partners, are numerous and all stellar. The African American Advisory Board, Links Incorporated, our really superb chapter of the National Alzheimer's Association. I tell everyone, and no one has even tried to refute me, that of all the chapters, the St. Louis chapter is by far the best. Our Internal Ethics Committee, our Harvey A. Friedman Center for Aging, the Hope Center for Neurologic Disorders. I also want everyone to know that we are very well supported by our institution, the School of Medicine, but Washington University in general, in a number of ways, and we are the beneficiaries of great generosity from many people, most notably Charles and Joanne Knight, for whom our center now is named. I want to just mention our African American Advisory Board. We began this just about 10 years ago because the percentage of African Americans who were volunteering for our research was somewhere under 4%. We weren't doing a very good job of getting the word out about why it's important for African Americans to participate in Alzheimer's research, because they are more at risk of developing the illness. And if we only study whites, we'll learn about Alzheimer's disease in whites, but not in African Americans or other minorities. So our African American Advisory Board has been advising us about how to identify and hopefully overcome barriers to research participation. They're a remarkable group of individuals. The founding director is Norman Arce, and our current director is Ida Goodwin-Woolfolk, who is seated right here. She's waving her hand, and let's give a round of applause for all of them. And an interesting new development in the past year that has been spearheaded by Ida is a partnership with the Links Incorporated St. Louis chapter, which is a very prestigious organization, service organization for African American women, along with Centene. The Links St. Louis chapter helped us promote Maintaining a Healthy Brain luncheon last October at Sweetie Pies. And we had very excellent interest in the ADRC, and 9 participants are interested in enrolling. We'll have another follow-up event this October, and we've been interacting with the links in terms of educating and training them about Alzheimer's disease as well. I mentioned Mr. Say. Mr. Say is here. Yep, Mr. Say is raising his hand in the back. He remains a very active member of the board, but stepped down as founding director of the chair of the board, and when he did, we decided to honor his contributions with an annual lecture here at the medical school in this auditorium. You can see the previous SAY lecturers, including last year from Dr. Taylor Hardin. And we are very pleased to announce that the upcoming 2013 SAY lecture will be October 1st in this auditorium as well, and be led, and the SAY lecturer is Consuelo Wilkins, a former ADRC member who now is executive director of the Mahari Vanderbilt Alliance in Tennessee. We also have a major internationally recognized symposium that we hold regularly. We have been holding it every 2 years. It's in honor of Leonard Berg, the founding director of the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and my mentor. Leonard died in 2007, but we inaugurated his symposium in his name on the occasion of his stepping down as director of the ADRC in 1997. And this has grown in stature and in attendance. Our last one was last September. Got a great deal of publicity, and we will now hold the symposium every 2 years rather than every 2 years, because it's become, as I said, a major event that takes a great deal of planning. I apologize. I know that, as I say, this is such a talented group of individuals that many of you have been awarded honors that I either don't know about or more likely you've told me about and I've forgotten. So this is a partial list of honors for a group of our ADRC investigators. Randy Bateman was given the 2012 MetLife Promising Investigator Award. Tammy Benziger was given the Friedman Center for Aging Koplo Award, and Becky Fearberg the Friedman Center Friedman Award. Allison Goat is elected as a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Dave Holtzman, a very prestigious award from the pharmaceutical industry. The Academy of Science of St. Louis and the National Alzheimer's Association had a real birth of candidates in 2013, so they were stuck giving me their awards. And then last September, Mark Rapel was given the School of Medicine's highest honor of the 2nd century. Also note some promotions. Again, if I miss people, the fault is mine, and I apologize, but beginning in July, Bo Ansis will become Associate Professor of Neurology. Eric Music, who's finishing his ADRC Fellowship, will become Assistant Professor of Neurology, and Ken Zhang, Professor of Biostatistics with tenure. The past year, 2 leadership changes. Andre Denny became the Education Corps leader in last October. I had been interim leader after Jim Galvin left, and Jim was the leader after Tom Muser left to go to the University of Missouri St. Louis. And Tom has been a real source of support and knowledge throughout these different transitions, and is kind enough to come and join us today. So Tom, where are you? We've brought in new investigators in the past year, scholars and staff, Matthew Althage in Biomarkers Corps, Aaron Householder in Neuropathology, Matt Jaslik in Biostatistics, 2 really delightful visiting scholars from South Korea, Dr. Kuhn, Dr. Lim, Sheng-Mei Ma in Biomarkers Corps, Dee Ritter in the Memory and Aging Project, Benjamin Vincent in the Neuropathology Corps, and Davis Ryman is a neurology resident just finishing his last year of residency in July 1. He'll become the next ADRC fellow working with Randy Bateman. We've had some individuals leave as well. I won't name them all. We're going to really miss Denise. We're going to miss them all, but we're really going to miss Denise Levitch from our Diane Trials unit. She's moving with her husband to Florida. Bob Mack and Yvette Chalene are both moving to the University of Pennsylvania. So renovation and expansion, we're pretty much complete. Maybe a few details to attend to, but in our building where we've been since really 1995 at 4488 Forest Park Avenue, it now carries the name of our benefactors, Charles and Joanne Knight, and the space is much nicer. I hope you will agree if you haven't been there. And we have new space, and we're anxious to show that to you. There's going to be an open house at the new Knight ADRC just following this presentation. Many people have worked on providing the open house and getting everything ready to greet all of you, so we certainly hope you take advantage and walk on over to come and share it with us. But even though there's a large group of individuals, one person usually ends up being the point person, and she is not here. She wants to stay at the ADRC and be certain of the first guest welcome, and her name is Christy Stewart. So she's relatively new to our program, but if you do come and see Christy, please thank her for all of her hard work. So the renovation, the Memory and Aging Project, remember this clinical research office, euphemistically called the first floor of the building. It's the basement, but it's down the first floor. It's where we do all of our assessments. It's much nicer, much brighter. Everything has been somewhat expanded. We've moved some office space out of there and converted it into assessment rooms, new blood draw area. So new furniture, new paint, new lighting. Everything looks nicer, I think. Here's our new blood draw room, much larger. New examination room. We can do lumbar puncture to obtain CSF here. The psychometricians now, they've been various places in the building, including right next to the pediatric group, which wasn't good for kids getting vaccinations, but now they have their own psychometric testing rooms. The entry level of the building is holding our administration and education cores, a new lobby. It looks much brighter when you walk in, not nearly as dingy as it used to be. And we have our 9th ADRC designation. You walk through that door, you get to see a nice view of Forest Park Avenue. Of course, when you go there, that's all you will see. There's people hard at work planning the next grant. And the third floor has been expanded too. It has both ADRC space, but also the trials unit for Diane up there. And you walk in and you get to see a nice poster commemorating Randy Bateman's ascension to the Knight Distinguished Professor of Neurology. New initiatives. We have a remarkable education corps. It's led, as I mentioned, by Andre Denny, but also Jennifer Phillips and Berta Spencer. They do remarkable things and many really exciting things. One of the new things they've done this year is to pair first or second year medical students with someone who is a participant, has dementia, and their families, so that individuals who are just entering the medical profession can be able to interact with someone who has dementia, who will hopefully remove or overcome stigma and get their experience. It's the Dementia Understanding Opportunities began with a small group of individuals, intentionally small group of individuals, and everyone really enjoyed it. They completed every session. And so next year we're going to try to double that possibly. If anyone is interested in learning about this program, or if any medical students want to participate, please contact Jennifer. Our great partners at the St. Louis chapter of the Alzheimer's Association helped spearhead a Missouri Alzheimer's State Plan Task Force that submitted its final report to Governor Nixon in November of this year, and many important stipulations to help families coping with Alzheimer's disease, but also for research. Missouri in the 1980s to 1990s had been a leader among states in funding pilot research for Alzheimer's disease. It has not done so for years now because of the budget constraints, but one of the goals of the state plan, recommendation of the state plan is to restore that pilot grant focus. The Education Corps also has a mission of educating physicians in outstate Missouri, rural Missouri, about Alzheimer's disease. And so we call it the Clinician Partners Program. We pay for them to come here for a 3-day period of time, house them, and give them Alzheimer's disease 101. It's very highly anticipated. There are lots of candidates, nominees for this. We had 8 this past spring. And we're going to engage these individuals to be our partners when they return to their practices to help not only educate their peers, but also to help serve as ambassadors for the Night EDRC and potentially refer participants. A summer student program had been led by our partner, the Friedman Center for Aging, for many years. But a few years ago, the National Science Foundation, which funded that summer research program, ceased it, and so we have not had an organized summer student program. But we have many individuals from colleges and high schools who want to spend summer doing research with one or another ADRC investigator. And so we decided this year, with prompting from Andy Benzinger from our Imaging Corps and Angela Campbell from the Imaging Corps, and money from the Imaging Corps, to resuscitate that summer student program. Still, the laboratories will be where the students do their research, but all the students in ADRC-affiliated labs will come together at least once a week for some collaborative programs, seminars, and exposures, learning things they would not otherwise learn, such as how to perform research ethically and what should you look for in a mentor-mentee relationship. How do you apply to medical school or graduate school and so forth. So there are 24 students that are participating in the night from 14 different ADRC laboratories. And at the end of the summer, they'll all present whatever research they accomplished in a poster session. So the Education Corps, particularly Jennifer Phillips and Angela Campbell, are co-leading this. I don't know if you're aware that we often have people asking to volunteer at the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, and many of these are students who either like to come here just because they want to get exposure or whatever reason. We cannot accept them. The Washington University policy is such as you cannot bring people on and not pay them. You can't have volunteers. They're concerned about exploitation of having unpaid volunteers who work. This primarily has been centered around patient care, but it's been a blanket university policy. It's really been a hard time for us to overcome this. We have a student who last summer is a medical student from St. Louis University who wanted to work on a biomarker project. And it took us over 6 months to get the permission for her to do that. She lost half a year just trying to get Washington University to approve her to come here, even though she wanted nothing other than the experience. Well, again, the Education Corps is spearheaded with our Curriculum Office and Human Resources a plan to allow people to have an externship, it's still a volunteer situation, but they get training, and they're able to do that now without having to go through the rigorous background check for criminal activity and drug testing and so forth. And so it's been a remarkable model, and it's going to be the model for the whole medical school. So I'm just going to end now on some repetition of some terms that I hope that we in the Night ADRC will all agree to use. First, what do we mean by Alzheimer's disease? Many places, of course, when you say Alzheimer's disease, what's conjured up is a person who has the symptomatic phase. I think we've learned that Alzheimer's disease refers to the brain process, regardless of whether there are symptoms. So it's the brain disorder, and it has 2 stages. A preclinical stage, no symptoms, and we can identify that now in life with biomarkers. And a symptomatic stage. Now, this is not universal, this terminology, but I think it gets us out of the conundrum of trying to understand whether mild cognitive impairment is due to Alzheimer's disease or something else. There now is a category of mild cognitive impairment due to Alzheimer's disease, and I would say that's the first symptomatic phase of Alzheimer's disease, and it eliminates us if we use the term symptomatic AD from what is MCI, what is dementia. We can avoid that. So symptomatic and preclinical Alzheimer's disease. By far, the most common form of Alzheimer's disease is the late onset form, presumably not inherited. But autosomal dominant Alzheimer's disease is the genetic mutation where if you inherit that mutation from your parent, you will develop the symptomatic phase of the illness. So that's called aging. I've already mentioned the Memory and Aging Project. It's where we see all of our participants, no matter what grant mechanism supports them. Now, how do we remain so successful? Well, one is we spend a great deal of time trying to ensure that we all do things, just as I was saying, in use of terminology in a standard and uniform manner, so that we all know that assessment done on Tuesday of May 11th is the same as in June 18th. So we're doing the same thing, and to do that, we have to ensure compliance. So we have checks in place, so we're all doing things in a standardized and uniform manner. And here's one of our compliance methods, just notification. So I want you to see this. Danger, do not touch. Not only will this kill you, it will hurt the whole time you are dying. So this is one way we ensure compliance. And the other is communication. So here's a 24-hour kiosk that's open from 9 to 6. But the real key to our success is you. So thanks to all of the investigators, staff, and friends of the Nightingale ERC, and of course, thanks to all of our participants. Thanks very much.